Morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm very excited that we're on the cusp of a new sitting of Parliament. It's very exciting. This is a chance for true, positive, progressive leadership and to ensure that we, as political parties, make sure that every single person in Canada is protected during this very difficult second wave of the COVID pandemic. And so today, this morning, I just wanted to hopefully briefly outline to you some of our priorities for this sitting of Parliament, this incredibly important sitting of Parliament during this very important moment in our country's history. First and foremost, as Parliament begins a new sitting today, I want to remind members of Parliament, and the Green Party wants to remind all members of Parliament that people in Canada are counting on them and us to stay focused. The urgent needs of people in Canada and not any kind of pre-election posturing or positioning has to be the priority. Unfortunately, we know that a lot of the spirit of cross-party collaboration that helped us do so much in a very short period of time during the first wave of the pandemic has all but disappeared. For instance, despite marketing a Team Canada approach to the pandemic, particularly in the context of a minority parliament, the Prime Minister has not invited other party leaders to meet and be briefed on the COVID pandemic and on the government's response for months. This is the kind of thing that prevents parties from having and presenting a united front to the public, something that of course helps in terms of making sure that people feel confident in the response of the government and that we, as I said, we can present that united front. And so it's something that I hope the Prime Minister will begin to do again. And I would say that while cooperation doesn't preclude our party and any of the opposition parties from having a healthy debate and asking all of the necessary questions about the response to the pandemic, what it does absolutely preclude are the kind of brinksmanship, the kind of unnecessary moments of potential tension that we saw in the last Parliament. We saw those several times. They're unnecessary. That brinksmanship does not help. And I'm hoping that we don't see any repetition of that in this sitting. All of this serves to underline that we have to remember that there is no place for politics in any aspect of Canada's COVID-19 strategy, whether it's vaccine procurement or distribution or any of the other important decisions that we will still need to make during this period. As the government, this sitting begins, I note that the government has been straying further and further away from the promise that the Prime Minister makes every single time that he holds a press conference, which is to keep doing whatever it takes, and I'm quoting, whatever it takes for as long as it takes to beat COVID-19 and protect Canadians through the crisis. And so whether it's things like sick pay, urgent long-term care strategy, or relief for students, our Green Caucus is going to be working to see that the government begins to fulfill this commitment and does not stray from it. For instance, in the case of long-term care, we know that we are in the midst of a humanitarian crisis. It's unfolding before our very eyes. We have the worst record amongst rich countries in terms of our protection of long-term care residents and deaths in long-term care. And so we have called on the Prime Minister to convene a First Minister's meeting to agree on an urgent action plan to implement the clear, actionable recommendations that experts say will save lives immediately and which we've laid out a number of times. In the case of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or the CERB, the government has clearly admitted that it made a fundamental mistake, but it continues to refuse to correct it. Not only does it refuse, but it has said that any kind of correction of their mistake is off the table. And so those who have earned more than 5,000 gross in the previous year, who have not earned more than 5,000 net in the previous year, as opposed to 5,000 gross, are now being asked to repay a payment that the government has acknowledged clearly they made a mistake in giving instructions about. And so the Green Party says this is unacceptable. This is a mistake that the government made. It should not be laid on the backs of vulnerable Canadians. And the government should be immediately writing to the hundreds of thousands of recipients that are in such a period of uncertainty and tell them that they do not have to pay it back and they will not be required to pay it back. I point out that this underlines the fact that the patchwork and stopgap measures that we have created, whether in the context of COVID or in general, over the past number of years, that this is always going to leave people without support. And the pandemic has made that case more than ever. And it's exactly why the Green Party has continued to call and will continue to call for a guaranteed livable income. We've been calling for this since 2006, and we're very encouraged to see other parties beginning to support it. I note that the Liberal caucus has named this as their top policy priority, and I hope that the Prime Minister will take the lead and the guidance from his caucus. With respect to the climate plan, the Liberals' climate plan and legislation that were introduced last fall, there's no question that these are good enough. We've made that very clear that this will not allow Canada to meet its climate obligations. It's under the Paris Agreement or in general, and to do our fair share. And it is very frustrating to see workers across the country, particularly in regions like the prairies, being left behind because their government is failing to plan for their future. We saw last week that President Biden demonstrated decisive climate leadership and showed that it is possible to act, not to speak, but to truly act. And now is the time for our federal government to do the same and to show that it's serious about protecting the climate and the future of Canadian workers. One very powerful action that we could take within the life of this parliament and this sitting is for the government to announce that it is going to be launching discussions with the United States on the creation of a North American carbon border adjustment. And finally, the Green Party reiterates its call for the Prime Minister to convene an intergovernmental task force to coordinate a national response to Canada's greatest health crisis in over a century. Again, I turn to the example of the United States last week and note that President Biden on day one appointed a national COVID-19 coordinator to create a national unified response because he said that a coordinated approach and a roadmap were needed. At the same moment, Canada has no national coordinator, no national strategy, and no roadmap, despite the fact that frontline workers and medical associations continue to say that this dangerous lack of collaboration and coordination across levels of government is costing lives and compromising our response to the pandemic. So we've made that call for months and we'll continue to push for that. Alors, en français maintenant, alors que nous entrons dans une nouvelle session de Parlement, je veux souligner que les besoins urgents de la population et non pas le positionnement préélectoral doivent être notre priorité. Malheureusement, beaucoup de l'esprit de collaboration entre les partis qui a permis d'apporter du soutien essentiel aux Canadiens a disparu. Je note que ça fait des mois que notre Premier ministre n'a pas convoqué une réunion avec les autres chefs de parti pour donner ou offrir d'informations sur notre réponse à la pandémie. Et cela empêche les partis à présenter un front uni. Et je veux aussi souligner que oui, la collaboration n'exclut pas une opposition saine et nécessaire au sein du Parlement, mais ça empêche que le genre d'acrobatie politique inutile que nous avons, on a été témoin à plusieurs fois dans la dernière session, que ça ne se passe pas. Il ne faut jamais oublier qu'on ne devrait jamais avoir des questions de politique, de la positionnement politique dans notre stratégie COVID-19. Alors, au début de cette nouvelle session, le Parti vert, nous constatons que le gouvernement continue de s'éloigner de la promesse du Premier ministre de continuer à faire tout ce qu'il faut, aussi long qu'il le faudra pour combattre la COVID-19 et protéger les Canadiens et Canadiennes. Alors, le Parti vert, nous serons là pendant cette session de Parlement pour assurer qu'il soit question d'indemnité de maladie, d'une stratégie de soins de longue durée ou d'aide aux étudiants, que le caucus vert veillera que le gouvernement respecte son engagement. Sur l'état des centres de soins de longue durée, la crise qui déroule dans nos centres de soins de longue durée, on appelle encore au Premier ministre de convoquer une réunion des premiers ministres du Canada pour convenir un plan d'action urgent parce que c'est une crise humanitaire et les gens meurent chaque jour. Et les experts ont déjà proposé les recommandations. Il reste que de les mettre en œuvre. Sur le PCU, le gouvernement a déjà admis qu'ils ont fait une erreur. Ils ont déjà admis que c'était une erreur fondamentale, mais il insiste encore que les gens qui ont postulé pour le PCU avec une revenu moins que 5 000 net doivent le repayer. Alors, c'est quelque chose qui cause beaucoup de stress et inquiétude aux Canadiens et Canadiennes qui ont reçu le PCU. Et le Parti vert est très clair que le gouvernement doit confirmer que ces bénéficiaires de bonne foi ne devraient pas rembourser cette PCU. Et ça aussi souligne la nécessité d'avoir un revenu minimum garanti parce qu'on voit toujours qu'il y a des gens qui tombent, qui n'ont pas de protection, qui sont laissés tomber dans les lacunes dans notre filet social. Et la solution, c'est d'avoir un revenu minimum garanti et on le réclame depuis 2006. Le plan climatique du gouvernement libéral et la législation introduite en automne dernier ne suffisent pas. On sait que ça ne va pas nous aider et permettre de respecter nos obligations climatiques de Paris. Et je note que les États-Unis, dans les dernières semaines, ils ont pris des pas très importants pour montrer un leadership sur la lutte contre la crise climatique. Le Canada continue de prendre du retard dans la course mondiale vers une économie verte. Et c'est frustrant de voir que les travailleurs dans les régions vulnérables comme Alberta, Saskatchewan, et Terre-Neuve et Labrador, qui sont laissés pour compte pour la simple raison que le gouvernement ne parvient pas à faire ce qu'il faut pour assurer leur avenir. Alors maintenant, c'est le moment de s'engager, de proposer une frontière nord-américaine du carbone. Je souligne que le Parti vert reste encore le seul parti fédéral qui s'oppose à la fracturation hydraulique, au nouveau pipeline et au projet d'exploration pétrolier et gazier. Et on cherche à investir ces fonds dans l'énergie renouvelable, le clean tech, dans l'économie du futur. Finalement, je note que le gouvernement n'a pas encore convoqué une task force intergouvernementale COVID-19 et on fait appel encore au Premier ministre de le faire. Le président Joe Biden encore, il a nommé un coordinateur sur le COVID-19 pour lancer une réponse nationale unifiée. Et c'est ce qui est nécessaire au Canada aussi, surtout parce que nos associations médicales, nos travailleurs en première ligne le réclament et il dit que la manque de coordination entre les différents ordres du gouvernement crée une situation dangereuse. Alors, nous allons continuer à la convoquer. Et tout ça pour dire que le leadership est possible, qu'un agenda progressif et positif pendant cette session de Parlement est absolument possible. Le Parti vert va faire son part d'assurer que ça se passe. Leadership is possible. Action is possible. All it requires is leadership and a spirit of cooperation on behalf of people in Canada. And the party, le Parti vert, the Green Party, is going to absolutely make sure that it does its part to contribute to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour à tout le monde. Alors, si vous avez une question, c'est une question, un suivi. One question, one follow-up. Please use the raise hand feature. S'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction de lever la main si vous voulez demander une question. And please identify yourself, your media outlet. Veuillez vous identifier ainsi que votre média. Alors, on va commencer avec Hélène Bouzetti. We will start with Hélène Bouzetti. One question, one follow-up.
Oui, bonjour Madame Paul, Hélène Buzetti du journal Le Devoir. Écoutez, on parle beaucoup des voyageurs qui vont à l'étranger, notamment pour la semaine de relâche. On veut les limiter. J'aimerais savoir, au Parti vert, êtes-vous d'accord avec l'interdiction des voyages non essentiels? Et comment feriez-vous pour les limiter? Certains parlent d'interdire de sortir du pays, d'autres proposent d'imposer une quarantaine obligatoire au retour. Vous, votre préférence, ce serait quoi?
Bon, ça fait plusieurs mois que les voyages non essentiels sont déconseillés et le Parti vert soutient cette position, surtout parce que c'est la recommandation de nos experts de santé. Un des problèmes, comme j'ai souligné dans mes remarques, c'est qu'il y a des messages mixtes. Bon, d'abord, il y a aussi des représentants, des députés, des représentants élus qui ont voyagé pendant les vacances de décembre. Alors, il y a ce message mixte, il y a aussi le message mixte parce qu'il n'a pas, comme j'ai dit, un message coordonné parmi les provinces et avec le gouvernement fédéral. Mais oui, c'est clair que ce n'est pas le moment de voyager pour des raisons non essentielles. Ça doit être un message clair, qui est clair et joint de tous les niveaux du gouvernement. Je crois que c'est le protocole, c'est d'avoir une quarantaine mandatoire après les voyages. Le Parti vert soutient ça aussi. J'aimerais bien avoir confiance dans les Canadiens et Canadiennes de suivre les conseils de nos officiels médicaux. Mais si c'est nécessaire d'avoir des restrictions ou des sanctions plus sévères, c'est aussi quelque chose à considérer.
Donc, en sous-question, je comprends que vous seriez d'accord avec cette idée d'imposer une quarantaine surveillée, payante, où les gens paieraient leur séjour en hôtel, par exemple. Pouvez-vous juste clarifier ça? Et dans le même sujet, aujourd'hui, le gouvernement va déposer un projet de loi pour restreindre l'accès aux congés de maladie payés pour justement ces voyageurs. Êtes-vous d'accord avec ça? Êtes-vous d'accord avec l'idée de l'adopter rapidement?
Bon, juste pour retourner à la première partie, parce que je suis d'accord, notre parti soutient une quarantaine mandatoire, pardon, si les gens n'ont pas la possibilité de le faire chez eux. Oui, absolument, il faut qu'il y ait des autres options. Si c'est un voyage non essentiel, il faut que ces gens qui considèrent qu'il y aura une quarantaine et doivent le faire dans une manière qui est saine. Alors ça, c'est eux. Mais oui, non, mais de directement diriger tout le monde vers des hôtels, non, c'est pas ce que j'espère que ce ne serait pas nécessaire, mais tout le monde doit avoir leur plan pour une quarantaine. Et le quarantaine doit être une partie de leur plan de voyage. Mais comme j'ai dit, le meilleur, c'est d'avoir les Canadiens et Canadiennes décider d'annuler tous leurs voyages non essentiels pendant la période de vacances qui arrive. Pour votre deuxième question, je vais essayer de me souvenir, je crois que c'était…
Le congé maladie.
Le congé maladie, oui. Bon, le congé maladie, c'était quelque chose à créer pour assurer que les gens qui n'ont pas, qui ont besoin de l'option de rester chez eux pour protéger leur famille, leur communauté, leurs collègues, peuvent le faire. Ce n'était pas là pour les gens qui voyagent pour des raisons non essentielles, qui voyagent pour les vacances. Alors, je n'ai pas encore parlé ce matin avec notre caucus. On va parler dans la prochaine heure. mais je crois que ce type de législation, c'est un type de législation que nous allons soutenir. Merci.
D'accord.
Merci, Hélène. Est-ce que c'est clair? C'est que comme vous savez, je ne peux pas prononcer pour tout le parti, mais je peux vous assurer avec un grand degré de confiance que notre parti, non, on ne veut pas que ce type de soutien, que c'est dirigé vers les gens qui ont décidé de voyager dans un moment de crise où c'est déconseillé par nos officiels de santé.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Could you just repeat in English, please?
Yes.
Or give it just an overview in English.
Yes. So very briefly, we want to underline that the fact that we do not have coordinated, unified messaging on subjects as important as travel is something that creates confusion. This, of course, is exacerbated when we see public officials, whether elected or otherwise, having chosen to travel during the December holidays. And so we want, first of all, as we said, because we believe in a coordinated response, we want to ensure that every level of government is giving a clear message to people in Canada, which is that they should not be traveling for non-essential reasons during the upcoming vacation period, that they need to stay at home, that they need to do that to protect their communities. And so we support that message. It is our message because it is the message of our health officials. In terms of quarantine, there should be a mandatory quarantine after returning to Canada for when you've been traveling for non-essential reasons, which again, we hope that people in Canada will choose not to do at all. That quarantine should either be provided for in your residence, and if it is not, you need to understand that you're going to have a clear plan for quarantining, whether that's in a hotel or in some other place that you have in place. That has to be an essential part of any travel that's done, particularly if it's non-essential. And so while I haven't spoken with our caucus yet this morning about how they plan to vote on that, I'm quite certain that that is something that our caucus supports because it's what the health officials have asked us for.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. David Thurton, one question, one follow-up, please.
Hi, David Thurton, CBC News. Madam Paul, we haven't heard an apology from the Prime Minister to the employees of Rideau Hall after that damning report. Why do you think the Prime Minister hasn't apologized? And do you think that's long overdue?
I couldn't, I try not to divine the soul of another person. And so I couldn't say exactly, David. I mean, that's a question you'd have to direct toward him. But what I will say is that, just saying you're sorry, sometimes just saying that you've made a mistake, just saying that something has been overlooked that shouldn't have been, can be a very powerful thing. And regardless of one's position, regardless of how high one rises in life, being able to have the humility to say that things were done incorrectly, I didn't do something as well as I could have, and there were consequences for that, is something that you should always be able to say and ready to say when it's needed. I have not read the report, but that being said, if what we're hearing about the report turns out to be correct, it's important to understand that this was a person who was selected directly by the Prime Minister, bypassing any sort of arm's length review and vetting process. And so if there were mistakes made either in the vetting or if there was a lack of oversight of that role during the years that followed that appointment, then that is something that one would hope the person responsible would be accountable for and would acknowledge their accountability for.
Conservative leader Erin O'Toole said that this has created a bit of a mini constitutional crisis. What are your concerns? Do you agree with that, first of all? And what are your concerns if Trudeau appoints another Governor General without consulting opposition parties like yourself and the other ones?
I think that we have a system in place to deal with this kind of eventuality. While it is unprecedented, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is now the administrator. There is no vacuum, and so that kind of language, again, coming back to my earlier remarks, is the kind of language that, in the context of this pandemic, in the context of all of the very important legislation, all of the very important actions that this Parliament still needs to take to protect people in Canada, whether it's on sick pay or long-term care, or greater aid for the people that still are falling through the cracks. That kind of language is not helpful, and it's certainly not correct. I have all the confidence in the world that our Chief Justice will ably be able to handle this role until a permanent replacement is found. I do hope, coming back to my earlier comment, that when it does come time to select the new Governor General, that the Prime Minister will ensure that the recommendations and the vetting come from an arm's length group. I don't necessarily think that the opposition parties need to be consulted on that person, but what we do need is a non-political arm's length group who can do a proper vetting of one of the most important roles in our constitutional system.
Thank you, David. Althea Raj.
Hi, I just actually had a clarification on something you said, but now I have a clarification on what you just answered, David. Do you mean that you want the arm's length group that I assume would be appointed by the PMO to select the individual, or to vet and shortlist the individual?
I think that I'm thinking of other senior appointments within, whether it's within the civil service or senior appointments within our system. And what you want is to have an arm's length vetting. What you ideally would like to have as well is the arm's length group generating recommendations. I don't know if that needs to be to the exclusion of the Prime Minister, for instance, or the opposition parties if the Prime Minister chooses to involve us. I think that great recommendations for a role like this can come from everywhere. But at the end of the day, what you need to ensure is that once the names are put forward, that anyone that is being seriously considered has a non-political arm's length vetting to ensure that, to give the greatest degree of confidence in that person, and to ensure that, none of the, let's say, the pitfalls that it seemed the Prime Minister fell into this time can occur. People in Canada need to feel confidence that the Governor General is someone who has been gone through the proper vetting, that the person, while having a positive relationship with the Prime Minister, is not beholden to that person. And so having an arm's length body it seems to me, is the most obvious way to achieve that.
Okay, so more than the body that was created, the committee that Prime Minister Harper had used to select David Johnston, more than like CSIS and the RCMP doing criminal and financial checks, you'd actually want somebody to go in and look at people's references and have that done by an independent body, if I understand correctly. And then let me just tack on my other clarification that I wanted to ask, which is, you started off by saying that the Prime Minister was not involving or had not made available the briefings to, and I wasn't sure if you meant that the MPs can no longer have a call with public health officials in the way that they did in the past, or if you meant that the Prime Minister had not met with the opposition leaders one-on-one as he did in September.
Well, that's answering your second question first. That's exactly it. We had one briefing this fall with the Prime Minister and Dr. Tam and the opposition leaders on the current state of play with COVID, and on what needed to be done, what the response needed to be. It was extremely helpful to have that briefing. If you're going to talk about a Team Canada approach, then that really has to involve Team Canada. You can't have opposition parties learning about the latest numbers, the latest rates of infection, the latest strategy for vaccine procurement and distribution on the news like everyone else. If we're going to be able to speak competently, if we're going to be able to speak with a unified voice on the strategy, then it just stands to reason that we need to be a part of it. And so if the Prime Minister wants to take the politics out of COVID-19, and if he wants to ensure that we really are all working together to get through this together, then we need to see more positive actions on his part. And one of the simplest things that he can do is to have regular briefings with the opposition leaders about COVID-19 in the way that he does with our first ministers in the provinces and territories. And then, yes, the vetting, again, I want to be extremely careful with respect to my comments about the Governor General, because I am not seized of all of the facts. And as I said, I'm not looking to make any political hay out of this. I'm not looking to throw fuel on the fire or make any kind of, forgive the pun, incendiary statements about this. What I will say is that in this case and in every case, when you're hiring a senior official, the vetting needs to be very thorough. And so whatever elements are required for that to happen, that's what needs to be put in place. I don't know, I can't speak to all of the elements that were included in this one, but as I understand it, the arm's length body that had been put in place under the previous government was not involved in this selection process. And if that's the case, and if there was no such arm's length vetting done, then we need to make sure that the next time around there is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Althea.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? No? So that will conclude our press conference for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Alors, ça termine cette conférence de presse.
Does David have one last question? Just making sure.
I do. So I also just wanted to clarify your comment on travel. Are you just calling for a unified messaging, or do you want to see the government go further and possibly impose restrictions on air travel? Can you just clarify that?
Yes, and thank you. I mean, I really welcome, by the way, any opportunities to clarify. One of my New Year's resolutions is to make sure that I'm as clear as I can be. I don't become one of those politicians that sort of dances around the answers. So as clearly as I can say, we first, the question of whether we should ramp up restrictions to travel is an excellent one. It's one that I'll be discussing with our caucus when we meet in about an hour. What I can tell you so far is that we absolutely, beyond, as I said, the clear messaging, we absolutely support the clear indication that people should not be traveling for non-essential reasons. If there is a way of vetting travel, if there is a way of making sure that that is respected in some way that we have not yet considered, then we're definitely willing to do that. I know that Marc Garneau, for instance, has said that imposing restrictions or using the Emergencies Act to impose restrictions is not off the table. If that's something that the government is proposing, then that's something that we'll consider. But I would say, let's start with the simple things first, which is giving people very clear messages about why they shouldn't do this, about the risk that they're putting their communities at when they do this, and about the very strict quarantine measures that they're going to have to live through on the other side if they choose to do that. I'm hoping that that will be enough. And if it's not enough, and if we see our COVID cases continuing to increase, then I'm certain that our party would want to work with the government to consider increasing the restrictions and the response.
Thank you. Do you have no follow-up? Okay, I love that. No more questions. So that ends our press conference today. Merci à tout le monde. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Merci
Mr. Paul.
beaucoup.